In 1900, there were about 8,000 registered cars in all of America. By 1910, that number had exploded to nearly 500,000 cars and trucks. But there was a problem: the roads. Today, we're going to talk about one road that was designed to make a difference: the Lincoln Highway. Greetings, everyone. I'm Gail Macinda with History Heights, and we're glad you're here. Be sure to like and share this video and ask any questions in the comments below. And please subscribe to this channel so that you'll know every time we upload a new video. Let's get started. Our special guest today is Shelton Kozak. Kay has multiple degrees in a wide range of disciplines, and she's taught at the college level for over 30 years. Her varied educational and professional background encompasses cultural anthropology, music, Russia history, cultures of Southeast Asia, library and archival research, and instructional technology. Of particular interest to us today is that she's the longest serving president of the revitalized Lincoln Highway Association, an organization we're going to be talking about in this video. Shelton Kozak, welcome to History Heights.
Thank you.
What we call the Lincoln Highway today got its start as the Transcontinental National Road. Could you talk a little bit about this idea that became realized as the Lincoln Highway?
Sure. So the first person who came up with the idea of the Lincoln Highway was a man named Carl Fisher, and he lived in the Indianapolis area, and he's also responsible for creating the Indianapolis 500. And he understood that people would buy more cars if they could have nicer roads to drive them on. Think back to 1900, 1910. What do you think roads were made of back then? Mud. And they didn't really have a lot of paved roads really anywhere outside cities. And Carl Fisher understood that if more people would buy cars, they would need nicer roads to drive on. So what he first came up with what he wanted to call the coast to coast rock highway. Now, he wanted to have that improved and get gravel and cement, but the name itself wasn't very marketable. Coast to coast rock highway doesn't sound too interesting. So the idea was good to have a road that went from New York City to San Francisco so that people could get from one side of the country to the other. That idea was good, but not the name. And his friend, Henry Joy, who was the president of Packard Motors, and they made cars. His father had worked with Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was an employee of Henry Joy's father for the Illinois Central Railroad. And Henry Joy said, "Okay, Carl Fisher, you've got a really good idea in having a road going coast to coast, but the name is no good. Why don't you name it after Abraham Lincoln?" And it became the Abraham Lincoln Memorial Highway, or Lincoln Highway for short. And they really found a better strategy with talking to people throughout the United States, and they were more excited about having a memorial highway named after Abraham Lincoln than they were the Coast to Coast Rock Highway, which wasn't a very interesting title.
So the original name was functional and descriptive, but not good at marketing. So this was really sounds like a marketing decision more than anything else. And
yes,
using the name of this beloved president seemed like a good plan, doesn't it?
Yeah, it works on really two levels, because when Henry Joy was young, he heard stories from his father about working with Abraham Lincoln and how good a lawyer Lincoln was. And Abraham Lincoln was respected by Henry Joy's father. So Henry Joy had always grown up with positive stories about Abraham Lincoln from his father. And Carl Fisher actually was good at marketing and
Mhm.
selling.
Yeah.
He had some crazy marketing strategies. Fisher was thought to have owned the very first automobile sales dealership.
Mhm.
When cars were first created, they would be sold from the manufacturer directly. So you'd go to the factory where they were putting them together, and that's where you would buy a car. But Carl Fisher, he didn't build cars, but he had a sales dealership. And so he knew how to sell cars. He originally started out in bicycles, but he soon saw with the automobile that more people would probably be buying automobiles. So Carl Fisher was very good at marketing. So the two of them worked together, and naming it the Lincoln Highway works on really multiple levels.
This makes a lot of sense to me. One of our History Heights ebook is actually on the first running of the Indianapolis 500, and so we got into the story of Carl Fisher and some of his creative marketing ideas for his car dealership. So it makes sense that he carried on this same entrepreneurial spirit and marketing spirit into what he also felt dedicated to, which was building this highway that would go from coast to coast. These two really work together beautifully. I'm very happy
Yes.
with these two topics. Uh, Tell me, was there a standard construction requirement or regulations for that which could be included on this official highway, or was it dimensions or material, or how did they say, okay, this we're going to count and this we're not?
Okay, so back then, there were not really any specifications for how roads should be built. There was a lot of experimentation and trying to find what was going to be a good material. For example, when they first made gravel roads, when people drove on them, that would just kick up all kinds of dust. And a lot of the first automobiles did not have a roof or windows, they were open. So any dust that people would encounter on the road, that would end up in people's faces and on their clothing.
And I'm
So
going to
there were,
interject here. So that's why we see these pictures of the old cars with people wearing dusters and hats and the goggles and everything, is because of,
yes,
well, that makes sense. Now we understand. Okay, didn't mean to interrupt.
yes. So the people would wear goggles to keep the dust out of their eyes, and they would wear a special coat called a duster. The duster was meant to collect dust. So you'd put that on over your regular clothing, and then you'd like leave that in the car when you were done traveling because it picked up all the
Mhm.
dust. So some of the first roads were very dusty if they had gravel. So people then started spreading oil on them periodically to keep the dust down. But others kept thinking, well, we have cement, and maybe cement would be a good material, or in concrete. And they kept experimenting with cement and concrete, and asphalt came later, but they would try out different material to see what worked, what didn't work. They also used bricks. Bricks for roads were very dense and heavy, and they actually last a long time, but they give kind of a bumpy ride. So some sections of the Lincoln Highway still have bricks, and some sections have bricks underneath asphalt. But bricks are very durable. They last a long time if they're the special ones made for roads. But a car going on it is going to have a very, very bumpy and not very smooth. And you can't go fast on bricks. So they just kept experimenting with what would be a good road material.
I live in a town that still has a lot of brick streets, and the local residents seem to have a love-hate relationship with them. We love them for the nostalgia, but the jarringness of the road, even with our modern cars, is substantial. So I understand that. So these different sections of this highway could be composed of different materials as you went from one section to another.
Yes,
Okay.
there are still some sections that aren't uh, the fastest route that still have gravel. So, what the Lincoln Highway Association did, and this was a group started by Carl Fisher and Henry Joy, they figured out what's the best route to go from New York City to San Francisco. And over time, they would try and find faster routes. So sometimes they would have a route that went and made a sharp turn. Well, that's not very safe to drive on. A curve is better. So here and there, they put in curves, and they might have left the original hairpin turn in place, especially if people were living on that. They still needed a way to get back home. And some of those never got paved. There are some very small sections that still have gravel, but there are more improved sections where there's curves, and those got paved.
So there's just some modifications that happened along the way that became evident through use and just what people needed to do, and probably land acquisition too. I would think that the right of ways might have made a difference in some of that too.
Yes. In one particular town in Creston, Illinois, the Lincoln Highway doesn't go straight across. It goes in a turn, and then another turn, and then another turn, and then another turn, and two more turns, and then around. And it makes about 7 turns in about a half mile. And that's because one person was not interested in selling his land, so that the Lincoln Highway could go straight across. So that it does make a difference if people have land, and if they're interested in selling it, or if they were not interested in selling it, the road had to go around where their land was.
That makes sense. I've been familiar with the Lincoln Highway as its own entity for as long as I can remember, but it was only relatively recently that I learned about this seedling mile program. And I first found out about that when I collect pictures of historical markers and informational signs. And I actually saw the historical marker in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and was absolutely intrigued by this idea of a seedling mile program. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So when the Lincoln Highway, when they were working on it, starting in 1912, but really, they really started getting the work done in 1913, where they actually went out and started mapping where the highway should go. They expected that they would be able to raise private money through donations to pave it all the way across from New York City to San Francisco. Back then, the government did not have a full system to tax roads or gasoline tax and use tax money to improve roads. Lincoln Highway Association was trying to raise private money. Well, it became just impossible to raise enough money to put concrete all the way from New York City to San Francisco through private money. government would have to fund that later. But what they did do is they put in seedling miles, and they would select a particularly muddy section and drain it, smooth it out, and pave it with a mile of concrete. And that would then show people what a really good road could be like compared to mud. If there's no gravel, it's just a dirt road. In the springtime or after a big heavy rain, those dirt roads would become mud. And it's not just a little bit of mud that you might have seen on a dirt road, or somebody's garden. The mud, when cars were driving through it, the mud would be about 6 inches thick and deep. So if a car is going through it, it would get stuck. And so they would pick sections where it was very muddy and pave it, and then show people, hey, this is what a really good road could be like. So they couldn't find enough money to pave the entire 3,383 miles of the Lincoln Highway, but they found enough donation money to create seedling miles to show people, hey, this is what a really good road could look like.
That's really, again, good marketing and good PR work too, isn't it? I love this. Was the original goal of connecting the nation from coast to coast with a highway ever achieved? And if so, when?
So they did map out a route all the way from New York City to San Francisco. They mapped it out in 1913. They presented that to a group of governors who were all meeting in Colorado, in Denver. Well, Denver and Colorado, it's very mountainous, and that's not the fastest way to get from coast to coast. But they presented it to all the governors in Colorado, and the governor of Colorado was very angry that the Lincoln Highway did not go through his state. So they created a loop. So the Lincoln Highway goes straight across Nebraska and Wyoming, but they added a loop to south to Denver and then back up again, because the governor of Colorado was very angry. But that was not the fastest way to get from New York to San Francisco. So after the governor kind of calmed down, after a few short years, they removed the Colorado loop from the official Lincoln Highway, because they really wanted what's going to be the fastest way to get from New York to San Francisco, and that's not to go through the mountains.
So it was eventually completed?
Yes, and it was dedicated on Halloween of 1913. And they chose Halloween because they had the work done, they had the mapping done, and they already knew people were going to have celebrations because it was Halloween, and even in 1913, people were excited about Halloween. So it was officially dedicated on Halloween in 1913.
Do you have any maps that can show us what that route looked like?
Yes, I do. So the Lincoln Highway is in red. So some of the other blue lines are other major roads in the United States, but the Lincoln Highway is the line in red that goes from New York to San Francisco.
It really was a visionary program, wasn't it? And
Yes.
Really kind of paid homage to the way our country was growing and connecting it together socially as well as politically. So this is really an important statement of our country, and is in addition to the improvement in transportation, just getting things around from one place to another. Are there any sections of the original Lincoln Highway that are still in use?
Most of it,
Really?
yes. You can drive about 90% of the Lincoln Highway on the original route. There is one section in Utah that's now an Army base. So you can't drive through the Army base unless you belong to the Army and the Air Force. And it's there's more than one branch of the military that uses that, but it's called Dugway, and you have to be in the military and you have to be part of that to drive the original section. But there is a rerouting that goes around the Army base. One year, the Lincoln Highway Association, we got special permission to take some buses through there, and we had Army escorts. And so we were able to go on the Lincoln Highway in the Army base. But that's one place where the original section goes, but you can't drive there unless you're part of the Army. But there is a route around the Army base that was designated later as the Lincoln Highway.
So are these sections now repaved? Have they become state highways, federal highways, county roads? Are all of the above?
All of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. So the Lincoln Highway, we think of it as one road, but it was really a patchwork of connecting already existing roads to try and find what's the fastest way from New York to San Francisco. And most of there is a way to get from coast to coast without driving on gravel, but driving on newer routings of it.
So how do we know if we're on the Lincoln Highway path, trail, road?
In some states, they have signage, but the Lincoln Highway Association, we have a map that we created using Google. And so you can look at Google Maps on the Lincoln Highway Association website, and you can see where the Lincoln Highway is. And you can also follow it. You can use a smartphone, and a smartphone will tell you where you are using GPS, and you can follow the Lincoln Highway using an online map that's on the internet.
Is there signage to designate?
There's signage in certain states.
Okay.
So there's signage in parts of Pennsylvania, a little bit in New Jersey, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, and parts of California. So the entire route is not signed. It takes a lot to work with the road people in each state to get the designation through the state's Department of Transportation. And then they have to put the signs up, because in most places it's the government that controls the roads. But some states have done that work, and there's signage on the Lincoln Highway. And they use the original sign that they created back in 1913 with L and then the red, white, and blue. In 1913 and 1914 and so on, they would paint a red, white, and blue with paint, and they would paint telephone poles. So most people who were traveling then, they didn't have maps, and they definitely didn't have GPS. So they would follow the red, white, and blue signs. But in some places, some businesses they got creative. They wanted people driving past their business. So they would go out and paint the signs themselves because it was really easy just to paint a red, white, and blue uh, uh, sign on a telephone pole and say, hey, the Lincoln Highway is this way. But that might have been not the real Lincoln Highway. And there was a problem with that. In 1928, the Lincoln Highway Association wanted to make sure that people knew where the real Lincoln Highway was. So they had concrete markers with a bronze medallion of Abraham Lincoln, and they would put those out where the real Lincoln Highway was. And they did that in 1928. And they used a very large and very organized group to help them put the signs up in 1928. And that was the Boy Scouts. Because the Boy Scouts in 1928, they had Boy Scouts all up and down the Lincoln Highway. And it was easier to work with them to have them put up the concrete markers that were not easily copied by a business who wanted travelers to go past their business.
Not unlike some of the things that happened with our interstate that came later, where certain businesses wanted to be located on these major thoroughfares of one sort or another. Uh, all of these links that you've been talking about, I'll make sure that they're all down in the description box below. So please, guys, check those out for more information so you can do some more research on your own. Kay, tell us a little bit about what are the ongoing activities for the Lincoln Memorial Highway Association, and for our viewers who are interested in learning more about the association, what should they do?
Sure. So the Lincoln Highway Association, we still exist. And one of the things that we did in the past was research exactly where the Lincoln Highway went through. And we also detailed and researched where all the older routes were that might not have been the fastest route after they made some improvements. And all of those are put together on an online map. We have a magazine that comes out 4 times a year that talks about a lot of the history of some of the old hotels, the old businesses that used to be on the Lincoln Highway. There were a lot of travelers in the past who wrote about their experiences, especially a man named Dwight Eisenhower, who became a general in World War II and later the president of the United States. When he was young and in the Army, he went and traveled with a convoy across the Lincoln Highway in 1919. 1919, not very much of it was paved at all, and they had heavy Army vehicles. So he wrote about his experiences with mud and the big Army vehicles breaking bridges because they were too heavy. And so we also will research people who wrote about their experiences in the past. We have a conference that we do once a year. But a lot of what we do is we have people who like to get together and drive on the Lincoln Highway, because it's different than driving on the interstate. On the interstate, you don't see a lot of the United States. You might see fields and billboards, and sometimes you go through cities, but you're going really fast. You might be going 55 to 70 miles an hour and you don't see things. The Lincoln Highway, most of it is not on an interstate, and you slow down and you have stop signs and stoplights and things to see, and you can't drive as fast on it as the interstate. So there's a lot of people who like to get together and drive on the Lincoln Highway, and it's possible to drive the whole way from Times Square, New York City, where it starts, to San Francisco. And lots of people will drive the whole way, or they'll drive a section of it. They might drive for a couple of days. They might just drive for a half a day. But there's a lot of people who like to drive the Lincoln Highway and visit places all up and down the Lincoln Highway. There's a lot of Abraham Lincoln statues on the Lincoln Highway that people will go and see as well.
Well, as someone who enjoys traveling back roads, this is something I'm going to need to explore some more for sure. And then we also have a Facebook group called History on the Highway, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, how I first found out about this seedling mile thing. Is that when anytime I have an opportunity to get out and see a historical marker or an informational sign, take pictures of it, and we posted in this Facebook group, and we now have all 50 states and some foreign countries represented by that, and it's just so rich to be able to stand in a place and see what happened in a different time and in a different era, and just to kind of relive those things that we just don't have those opportunities when we're driving by at 55 plus miles an hour. So I think this is really a valuable thing to do. Well, Kay, thank you so very much for being with us today. This has been really interesting and really helpful. And I hope that as we do get out and take those road trips, we'll remember those people who quite literally paved the way for us. It's an important thing to do.
Thank you.
Well, as always, guys, remember that we learn from the past, but we don't live there. Go be awesome today and make your own history. Bye for now.